What's up, everybody? Welcome. It is the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, DFS edition, Super Bowl 54, Chiefs and 49ers. We're here to give you some NFL DFS picks, lineup advice, both FanDuel and DraftKings for the upcoming big game, single game showdown format. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, last year's single game Super Bowl $1 million winner. And today I'm joined by Chris, our NFL writer, contributor extraordinaire. What's up, Chris?
Brian, what's going on, man? I mean, it's really tough to follow the intro when you kind of the reigning champion of the DraftKings Millionaire Maker Super Bowl slate. But, I'm definitely here to kind of talk about this slate and hopefully, I can take that title from you.
Dude, I hope you can, because if I win again, DraftKings may be knocking at my door.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I know you have some entries into the big contest as well, and we'll talk about strategy for that and FanDuel as well today. So we actually, both Chris and I just finished the daily plug. OccupyFantasy.com runs through every player on the slate, strategy for low risk, high risk contests, whether you've won tickets or whether you don't have tickets for the big contest on both sites. So go check that out, OccupyFantasy.com. That'll be up and ready by the time you listen to this video. So Chris, when we found out last Sunday that the 49ers and the Chiefs were going to be the two teams in the Super Bowl, what were your gut thoughts, your initial reactions from a DFS perspective?
Well, I mean, we talk pretty much every week about every single slate. And so, the rest of the Occupy staff knows that I was pulling hardcore for the Tennessee Titans to get knocked out. And I mean, no disrespect to actual Titans fans out there, but they are just a disaster from like a DFS perspective with, what Derrick Henry's been doing over the last few weeks. So I'm very glad that we're not dealing with that on this big slate with all these prizes. Very excited about the Chiefs. This is an explosive offense. But let's not forget about the San Francisco 49ers. I think this is a really, really talented passing offense, and I don't think many people are actually thinking of them that way right now.
Yeah, you're 100% right, and we detail this in the plug. But when you come off a game where your quarterback has 8 passing attempts, the running back has a career performance, 200 yards and 4 touchdowns, and his price has gone up tremendously. Raheem Mostert is who we're talking about. He's going to be the darling in a lot of players' eyes. So I guess, Chris, let's start with FanDuel, because our viewers play both FanDuel and DraftKings, and recently we've done more work on the FanDuel side as far as researching optimal strategies for the Showdown format. So given that it's half-point PPR scoring, given that we have Patrick Mahomes on this slate, given that's only 5 players in a FanDuel lineup, what are your thoughts on who's going to be the highest-owned MVP, and who are some guys that might go overlooked?
Well, I mean, let's be real. You and Moose have been leading the charge on doing the research for optimal lineups on FanDuel, and credit to you. I think I have learned a lot just from our conversations about this. And I think tournaments, even, or low risk contests, you're going to see both starting quarterbacks be some of the highest owned players on the slate, both be probably the 2 most popular MVPs on the slate. And it's just by virtue of how this kind of contest format is set up, and also just who's most likely to be the optimal MVP based off of half point PPR scoring. Patrick Mahomes being the most expensive player on the slate probably will be the more popular MVP, and it's probably because in most outcomes of this game, he probably is the quote unquote better quarterback statistically. But I do think that there's some value to weigh with this, and maybe locking's a little strong, but playing a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo at MVP in FanDuel.
Yeah, you and I were on the same page when we discussed this. Mahomes last week, and I say last week, it was I guess a week and a half ago. We're recording this Wednesday evening, 4 days before the Super Bowl. Mahomes was 45% in the MVP spot on FanDuel, and that's not an outlier. Anytime he's played, the Chiefs have been on a single game slate, Mahomes has been in that 40 to 50% MVP range. And I think we'll see similar here in a big casual contest. So when you can get a quarterback on FanDuel, which is the most optimal position in that scoring in a single game, and you can get Jimmy Garoppolo at 10, maybe even as high as 15, but definitely not higher than that, that gives you a lot of leverage. Um, as far as Mahomes goes, not to get too deep into this, but what are your thoughts on him with that matchup? Do you think he can overcome this 49ers defense? Obviously, it's Mahomes, but whose side are you on, the defense or Mahomes coming away here?
I'm kind of, San Francisco obviously won the NFC. They deserve all the credit in the world for doing that. But, I'm kind of lean towards this side of defense doesn't necessarily matter as much as offense. So I really do think Patrick Mahomes is going to be able to get out there and try and do the things he wants to do. Now, maybe they contain him. Maybe they actually kind of force him to spend more time throwing underneath, maybe looking for his running back or something like that. But I still think by the end of the night, his numbers will look a lot like Patrick Mahomes-esque stat lines that we have been used to seeing. So I think, particularly on FanDuel and how this format works, you're probably going to need him in your lineup somewhere. I just think if you want to give yourself a real chance to take down that $1 million, or at least only split it with like 25 people, right? You want to go with a different MVP on that slate. Now, maybe you have some thoughts on this for the people. How much salary should you leave over on FanDuel? And the way to do that, right, is kind of to look at how the salaries are on this slate for some of the players at the bottom of the salary tier. So, who are in your mind kind of these most attractive options to get into your FanDuel roster to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a great point, and a little anecdotal evidence here, and this is held true for the entirety of the FanDuel season as far as single game slates go. I actually chopped a first place prize in the conference championship during the Chiefs and Titans game. Me and 24 other people, and that was only a 40,000 person contest. And I had Mahomes as the MVP. He was 45%, as we said.
Yep.
I had $3,000. Yeah, now it's 400,000 people.
Yeah.
I had $3,000 in salary left over. Not unique enough to take it down, even with less than 10 people. So if you use Mahomes, you're going to have to leave over like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 in salary. And that's another reason why we like not using Mahomes at the MVP on FanDuel in super high risk contests, just because it's going to be a higher chance of being somewhat unique. And guys at the bottom that you can do that with, regardless if you have Garoppolo or anybody else or Mahomes, if you're leaving a lot of salary on the table, guys at the bottom there, we're talking Kyle Juszczyk, Anthony Sherman, these guys who might touch the ball once or twice, but they'll need to get into the end zone to have a chance to be in the optimal lineup. And then you have guys with a little more upside like Demarcus Robinson, McCole Hardman. I know who you're a big fan of.
Yeah. Well, I'll need some Hardman on this slate.
Yeah, so talk about him for a second.
It's just the fact that, we saw in some of the underlying metrics for usage in the championship round, he actually ran more routes than Demarcus Robinson for the first time all season, I think, right? So Hardman definitely slightly more involved in the offense. Probably won't see more than 3 or 4 targets at the most. But the nice thing about Hardman is he does have that added upside as the kick returner for the Chiefs. So on the off chance that he actually does break free on a long return and find the end zone, you've pretty much gotten the value you needed at his low salary, really on either website, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. I think he's $6K on FanDuel and 2,200-ish on DraftKings.
Yep.
So. You're looking at one long touchdown and hitting value, and I think we can expect him to be in about 20 to 25% of lineups on both sites. Chris, let's jump over to DraftKings really quickly, and we can also intertwine some positional talk as we go along here. But we like Garoppolo as MVP on FanDuel. What about on DraftKings, where quarterback scoring is not the most optimal position, especially in a high total game? But I think this may be a rare occurrence where we can target Garoppolo in the captain spot.
Yeah, we were actually talking about this a little bit earlier today before we started recording, and I just think he's way too cheap on DraftKings. The 2 quarterbacks are typically, some of your most expensive players on a DraftKings Showdown slate, usually within the top 3 or 4 players, just in terms of salary cost, right, to get into your lineup. And on DraftKings, Garoppolo is 7th. He's actually cheaper even than George Kittle. So I think you're going to see a lot of people probably look to roster his teammates like Kittle or the running back Raheem Mostert, who in everybody's brains, we remember this 4 touchdown game he just had. So think Garoppolo is going to go under-owned compared to what he probably should be. So even though, some of our research has suggested that quarterback captains aren't in the winning lineup nearly as often as people roster quarterbacks at captain, Garoppolo might be one of those guys that gets to be the exception to that rule. And I guess just to kind of frame that another way for the people to think about, it's not quite there, but this is pretty close to the pricing and type of situation. You kind of have a backup quarterback making the start, right? Like they really dropped Garoppolo's price after that NFC Championship game.
Yeah, and I don't believe that the ownership will follow, at least in the captain spot. Maybe he's owned a lot in the flex spot, but I think our early projections have him at 7, maybe 10% as the captain on DraftKings, and it's not like they're a major underdog. They're still projected to score 27 points or whatever it may be. So I think it's a really big leverage spot there. You mentioned Mostert. Go ahead. It sounds like you have more to add.
Well, I was gonna add to that. You say that they are underdog, but I mean, this is 54 point total, 54.5, depending on what book you're looking at, is kind of last I looked. And you're kind of seeing, at least according to one resource I was looking at earlier, more actual dollars coming in on the San Francisco side. So this may actually be one of those quote unquote fade the public situations where there are more tickets coming in, right, from the public on Kansas City to win. But it seems like a lot of the money is actually on San Francisco. And so if San Francisco does win this game, and it is, a 54-point total game, and Garoppolo does have, a nice passing game of multiple touchdown passes to different players, that's kind of the formula we need for him to be a good captain.
Yeah, you make a good point with the betting percentages as well. And is as simple as that sounds, it's a really good correlation between betting percentages and percentage of lineups that are using that team or favoring that game script in DFS single game especially. So you look at this game, majority of the tickets are on the over, majority of the tickets are on Kansas City. So I believe, especially in these large field contests, that a lot of lineups will be built with that in mind. Kansas City in a high scoring game script. So if you're looking to get any leverage at all, looking to fade the public like you said, then it's a San Francisco and under game script that gets you there. Right. All right, let's talk about the running backs really quickly. Raheem Mostert, I think the San Francisco running back situation is the key to the slate. Before we recorded this, like I said, it is Wednesday. We got news that Tevin Coleman will be he was limited in practice today. Sounds like he's going to suit up, a pain tolerance issue. The prop lines for Raheem Mostert, as we talked about in our Super Bowl props guide and in our Super Bowl props podcast, which you can get on YouTube or in your podcast app, they are doing no favors for a split backfield. They're projecting a full workload for Raheem Mostert. His salary is projecting a full workload for Raheem Mostert. I think, Chris, if we've learned anything from this San Francisco backfield, whether it's through the season or the playoffs, that we shouldn't trust just one guy to get the majority of the touches, no matter what we just saw.
The one thing, Brian, that I think we've learned to trust with the running backs in this San Francisco offense is to trust that Kyle Shanahan is going to try to manage their reps, right? And so what we saw last week or last game, because it's a week and a half ago now, I think is an outlier here. Tevin Coleman gets hurt pretty early in the second quarter. Matt Breida, only other active kind of real running back on the roster that day, and he's kind of in the doghouse, right? He's had fumbleitis. He's put the ball on the ground a little too much. So, and Mostert was just having success. They were riding the hot hand a little bit. This is kind of the classic outlier event for how Shanahan has used running backs all year long. Coleman's working hard to be available for this game. Everything sounds like he's going to play. And I mean, in the playoffs, we actually get more of an opportunity to get a more intimate look at these teams. We're fantasy players. We're watching every team every single week. There's 16 games, when there's no bye weeks, and there's sometimes hard to really dive in and follow usage, right? Well, our eyeballs have actually seen that Kyle Shanahan likes to rotate these guys in and out and give them a fairly even distribution of carries. So, what did we do in the divisional round? Mostert came in, higher price than Coleman. I know you rostered a little more Coleman that week, and that worked out. In the championship round, it was the exact opposite. So now here in the Super Bowl, it's almost like it's kind of time to go back towards Coleman a little bit, or at least, if you're not comfortable with that, maybe fade Mostert, at least compared to how optimistic the prop lines, how optimistic the ownership projections look like they're going to be on a guy who, doesn't really get a lot of attention in the passing game, and outside of last week, just does not play a full 3-down.
Yeah, I think you hit all of the points perfectly. And whether or not we go back to Coleman or not, what I know for sure is that he won't be that popular because of the shoulder injury, because of Mostert's performance last week. And as you mentioned in that divisional round matchup against the Vikings, Coleman coming in as the number 2 running back was like 15% owned in DFS contests. And I think we'll see a similar number here. So if you're looking for the true chaos, you're looking for some regression to the mean, Coleman's a play. And hopefully we get at least, I think there's a limit, right, of how positive the reports can be, because if it gets way too positive, then maybe his ownership starts to creep back up again. But as long as it keeps on this limited practice, he should play. That's enough for me in my eyes. What about Damien Williams? Not to get too deep into everything, but I know you and I are both big fans of him. My initial reaction in our staff chat last Sunday night was that Damien Williams will be the optimal captain. That was my early prediction. And the more we dig into it, we know he has an elite usage, but will probably go overlooked given all the high dollar name plays in this game.
Yeah, I have a feeling like when you said that, we actually hadn't seen. I don't think we were expecting Damien to be, tied for, looks like, second most expensive player on FanDuel, 9,800 on DraftKings. So, I think that's probably why our tone has changed a little bit, and then also just game total. We'll get into players we like, I think, a captain on DraftKings because of the game total in a second. But this is almost the exact opposite of the San Francisco. Well, this is the exact opposite of the San Francisco treatment for running backs with the Chiefs. Since returning to the lineup healthy in week 16, I think it was, Damien has just completely taken full ownership of this backfield, running a route on over 90% of Mahomes' pass attempts. In that time period, kind of since coming back, getting basically all of the non-Mahomes rushes in the backfield the last couple weeks. I definitely think he's going to be potentially overlooked a little bit at captain on DraftKings, just because people are going to want to get the quarterbacks, because we know they're going to do that. People are going to want to get the name brand players like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and George Kittle into their captain spot. So here we have Damien Williams, who's getting basically all the touches out of the backfield and has seen 6 targets in each of the last 2 games. So we know that he's going to see a lot of opportunity in the passing game as well. I really, really like Damien Williams this week, if that wasn't obvious based off of everything I just said.
Yeah, just a little obvious, the tone of your voice. Super optimistic. So yeah, I mean, he ranks really highly in our model, especially on FanDuel. I think he's a great leverage MVP over there, and his usage in this game type really makes him a guy you should prioritize in your lineups. You mentioned other positions that we would like to talk about for DraftKings captain, and it is a high total game. Generally, pass catchers have been the optimal captain choice in these types of game scripts. I'm a sucker for Debo. I know there's some bias creeping in from my need for him to have a big game in the FFPC contest, but do you share my love for Debo in this game?
Tend to pass catchers when we see a game total and over 54 is actually approaching a range where we don't really have a large sample of games, quite frankly, for Showdown or single game on FanDuel that have actually gone off on this total. It's like, I think, in the range of like 10 to 15 games total over the last 2 years. So, keep that in mind. There might be a little bit of sampling error here, but more often than not, it means that the wide receiver or a tight end is the best captain to have on DraftKings when you get this type of game environment, which means, we really, really like guys like kind of looking at the model. We talked about this while putting the plug together. Tyreek Hill on the Chiefs side, and Deebo Samuel for San Francisco is the San Francisco player I think we like the most as well.
Yeah, I mean, Samuel has a unique role where he's getting at least 1 or 2 rushing attempts per game. And as we pointed out in the plug, they're not just like backfield carries. These are well-designed trap plays, end arounds, where he's averaging like 12 yards per carry. Add in his 5 targets per game, and you have a guy who's not tied to the quarterback's performance, and you have a guy who can still get over 100 yards receiving and has multi-touchdown upside. So whether that bias is influencing that decision or not, it's not influencing the model, and the model is a big fan of Debo this week as well. All right, Chris, before we get out of here, any final thoughts on this Showdown slate, whether it's strategy, players, contests, any final thoughts?
This is like the biggest Showdown slate I think we've seen all year, obviously, just from the number of contests that are available, how big kind of the total fields are for some of the larger contests. And so just to kind of stay on brand, if you will, with what we talk about here at Occupy. I mean, it's fun to dream about becoming a DFS million. You, of all people here, can talk about that better than anyone. But there are still plenty of opportunities on both FanDuel and DraftKings to play in some smaller field, single entry tournament, 100-player leagues, satellites for other sports, which I know we offer models for NBA, NHL. There will be models coming up for MLB when that season starts. I think what I've heard from you is that we're actually working on something for golf. So, there's a lot of opportunities to win some tickets on this slate to some future big GPPs. I wouldn't overlook those opportunities just because of some of these bigger contests that are staring you in the face this Sunday. Those bigger contests, we all want to win them. I get that, but they're hard to win. And I think people are going to overlook those other opportunities. So we should focus on those too.
Yeah, great call. I mean, there are plenty of satellites out there. It's a core strategy of ours here at Occupy Fantasy, targeting tickets through satellites, and all kinds of sports are available, FanDuel and DraftKings. So definitely check those out. All right, that'll do it for this video. We appreciate you. If you'd known the trouble we've gone through to get a podcast out for the Super Bowl, you'd appreciate all the effort we've put in. So if there have been any audio difficulties during this, we appreciate you listening and having the perseverance to stick through it. If you can get past the fact that it looks like I'm recording a hostage video right now on YouTube, we appreciate that as well. So do us a favor, click that subscribe button, whether it's in your podcast app or here on YouTube, and that way you get notified of our latest content. It'll go directly to your feeds. We'd appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube here if you like it. And if you have any comments or questions, you can either comment on YouTube, you can hit us up on Twitter at Occupy Fantasy. You can hit up Chris at CDR02989. You can hit up me at Brian Jester FF. For Chris, I'm Brian. We appreciate you listening. Good luck in the Super Bowl, and we'll talk to you soon.